Good afternoon, and I hope everybody has a reasonable level of blood sugar. I'm hoping that everyone has a reasonable level of blood sugar today, because I have a very vigorous presentation. I have to do that partly to refute those reports of my death spread by Randy Rhodes on Air America. So I'm going to be very lively up here. We've got a lot to show. It's going to be an average of about one slide every 15 or 20 seconds for the next 60 minutes. So please bear with me. I also have to say my usual method with the light pointer is now out of business unless I can point in both directions. Hard to do. So this is my book. That's the first edition. I commend it to your kind attention. It's on sale. We're now up to the third edition, as you see here. The third edition covers events up through the conclusion of the Moussaoui trial in Alexandria, Virginia, recently. Now, I want to salute this conference. I want to salute, above all, Alex Jones for being able to bring together one of the only political formations in this country which transcends the idiotic and obsolete left-right distinctions. It goes... Thank you. It goes beyond the wedge issues. It doesn't allow us all to be the dupes and pawns of Karl Rove and the other purveyors of wedge issues. We've got conservatives, we've got leftists, progressives, libertarians, communitarians, and of course we have a strong international dimension reaching into most of the countries of Europe, Latin America, Asia, the Arab world, Russia, and so forth. Now, a couple of things on my background. I began studying these questions almost 30 years ago. This was the kidnapping of the former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro by a group calling itself the Red Brigades. I wrote a study on it, published in Rome in 1978, Who Killed Aldo Moro? And the finding, as you see here, is it's not the Red Brigade's banner behind him, but it's the British flag. And this means NATO intelligence. This was a shorthand to show NATO intelligence. Milan, May 1st, 1978. Here are some Christian Democrats and others with a sign saying Kissinger and Gardner, the U.S. ambassador, kidnapped Moro and killed him. So we were denouncing false flag terrorism at that time in 1978. The issue was whether the Communist Party would come into the government. During the first Bush administration, you could already see the beginnings of administrative fascism taking shape on a somewhat narrower scale than we have today. And I followed that then in 1992 with this unauthorized biography. Thank you. A couple of highlights from this. We noticed that this was very popular in the war room of the Clinton campaign. Here's Stephanopoulos, Carville. Somehow I never got a check. I'm still waiting. And one of the findings, of course, was that the involvement of the Bush family in the attempt to kill President Reagan back in 1981. And if we look here in the lower right-hand corner, Bush's son was to dine with suspect's brother. Bush's son was to dine with suspect's brother. Bush's son means not Marvin that we've just heard about, but Neil. This is Silverado Neil Bush getting in his licks. The suspect's brother is Scott Hinckley, the elder brother of the would-be killer. And there it is. That's the Houston Post, since gone out of existence. It's confirmed the next day. Bush, the elder, says, yes, my son Neil was in close touch with Hinckley's brother. And here's Neil Bush in Colorado confessing the same thing. He was going to have dinner with Hinckley's elder brother the night after the killing. So wouldn't that be time for a special prosecutor? If you had a government of laws, we have no such thing. We live in complete illegality. And as soon as somebody starts focusing on some group or other for being illegal, I have to remind you, this entire system is one continuous creeping coup, one insurrection against law and constitution from beginning to end. For my purposes here, a very important aspect of this thing is that the hit on Reagan was bootlegged in, conduited, through a drill. The drill scheduled for the next day, presidential succession drill, 9 lives, meaning that those operations were done under the cover of a legally sanctioned operation. This is, of course, the other thing that the book is noted for. Here we have Fritz Thyssen, Nazi financier. He wrote a short autobiography, How He Paid Hitler. No secret there, by Fritz Thyssen. There he is. That's Thyssen back there. You see it over here. with Hitler. And it turns out, if you can read the fine print there, that Thyssen had $3 million at the Union Banking Corporation in Wall Street, of which Prescott Bush was a shareholder and a director. And that was the property that was seized by the Alien Property Office under the Trading with the Enemy Act. It was a Nazi bank. So the president's grandfather was the U.S. agent of a Nazi banker. Nice stuff. Right? All kinds of people. They deny it, by the way. They have a thing on their website saying none of that is true. So here you see some of the connections. For people who are interested in this presentation, in particular the people doing documentaries, I can give you copies of this if you're interested. This is the book that Bush the Elder commissioned to defend his father. That's Prescott right there. Duty on Our Country. It's a tissue of fiction, and the author here, Herskowitz, is mainly famous for writing a biography of Mickey Mantle, the ball player. Here's another version. Here's a limited hangout done by Kevin Phillips, copied all my stuff and accused me of being lost in snowdrifts of paranoia. You be the judge. Now let's talk about 9/11 more closely. This is my thesis right up front, and I think I was one of the people who knew it the same day. You can know it in about 30 seconds. You can say, you look at that, it's hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars. Who could do it? US, British, French, Russian, Mossad. If in China, then China. If in Japan, Japan. A couple of others like that. But given where it was and when it was, it's clear it's the US. And it's them, meaning a force within the US command. It is false flag, state-sponsored US terrorism. It's synthetic terror in the sense that it's artificial. We'll go into this in just a minute. And it's carried out by this rogue network. It's pretty much the Iran-Contra network in a slightly new form, cutting across the agencies, run through drills, and the goal is, first of all, to secure an oligarchical society, and to do that through the War of Civilizations, according to the thesis of Samuel Huntington. Now, here is the official version. This is the tissue of lies, the fiction by the Zelikow, Kane, Hamilton Commission. And it was on March 20th that Charlie Sheen rocked the world by saying he didn't believe any of that. And of course, it was an interview with Alex, who has certainly taken the lead on this. On that same day, I would only add, this is a couple of days later, this was my 30 seconds of fame in the wake of it. And here's a New York magazine. Now, that's not my part over there. No, not that part. I have the 9/11 conspiracy up here. They have some stuff about a lecture I gave in New York. I recommend this to you. This is an intelligent article by Mark Jacobson, The Ground Zero Grassy Knoll, sort of merging the Kennedy skeptics into the 9/11 skeptics. Now, my thesis is that 9/11 is not just an issue next to other issues. It is the overarching dominant issue. If you do not address 9/11, you get nothing. You will not stop the wars. You will not stop injustice. Bush has 35 to 40% of the U.S. population. They're scared out of their wits. You cannot use the arguments that, of humanitarian or pacifist or other things, which I find eloquent, but which they do not. It is a base which can only be attrited and eroded by 9/11 truth. And all other issues depend on this. And, of course, precisely for this reason, it has the greatest bang for the buck, as Charlie Sheen has shown. Charlie Sheen did more in half an hour on daytime radio than the whole left liberal wing of the Democratic Party in 5 years on primetime television. Now, everybody knows that there's this relation, right, that 9/11 truth is bad for Bush and Cheney. It's clear. But let's look for some really authoritative sources. Here we have Doonesbury. Now, look, this is the end of 2003, and he actually started with this 6 months earlier. Well, what about the chaos in Iraq? 9/11. The $500 billion budget deficit. It's more like $1 trillion now. 9/11. Environment. 9/11. Is the answer to every question 9/11? Yes. 9/11, 24/7. How long? 11/2, the election. 10/4. And of course, this is what he does. The argument made on Iraq is not an Iraq argument primarily. It is an appeal to the fear of 9/11. Similarly here, same speech, almost a year ago. Nothing has changed. Karl Rove has even stressed it. Lessons of 9/11 take center stage. How about another one? Press conference at the White House. Time to have a mic test. What's he going to say? 9/11. Well, everything about Iraq, the dead, the 2,500 now, torture, Flamegate, quagmire, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Domestic deficits, no bid contracts, gas prices, 9/11. And here we have the helpful Skippy McScapegoat. Skippy McScapegoat wants to show you how you can use 9/11 in a similar way in your personal affairs. Everyday jams, use 9/11. You knock over the cans, 9/11. Lose the game, 9/11. And of course, the most embarrassing, 9/11. For adultery, try 9/11. So it's the Swiss Army knife. Now, it should be clear, therefore, any person of goodwill who wants to stop the existing wars and to avoid the next one, which is upon us, should put 9/11 as the cutting edge of everything, in the same way that Craig Hill is saying that the impeachment resolution has bite, has traction and a chance. If you make the misprision of treason on 9/11 the first item against Bush and Cheney, that cuts into their base. If you make Iraq the first item, that solidifies their front. You got to attack the flank. Don't attack the front. Attack the flank. Attack the rear, but not the front. Now, this is, of course, the first line of defense. But now, who believes this right now today? Who supports this? These are intelligence experts who now tell us they were completely wrong on Iraq, but they know everything about 9/11. So they're discredited and failures, and we're supposed to believe them on 9/11. Now, I think in this case we have to recognize that the left liberal intelligentsia, the so-called radical liberals or gatekeepers, are the main supporters of the 9/11 myth. Here's a list. You can quibble with some individuals, maybe somebody wants to, but generally speaking, this is the story. The biggest barrier to 9/11 truth are the left liberals. And this person, Chomsky, this is Noam Chomsky. He's writing his name now, Noam with a capital G. See if you can figure that one out. This is now the main public supporter of the official version on 9/11. That is to say, of a racist, warmongering lie, a blood libel against the Arabs and the Muslims of this world, put out cynically by the people who really did it, and he supports them. And he tells people, don't get involved. And then, of course, in the broadcasting world, it's Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, hated throughout the Pacifica network, privatized her program, bilks the whole network for money. And then, of course, for the ultra-lefts, we have Ward Churchill, whose line is, if you don't accept the official version, you're an anti-Arab racist because you're saying Arabs are not capable of great things. I therefore have awarded Ward the Arlen Specter Award for 2005, the most imaginative defense of the official version in honor of the finder of the magic bullet thesis from the Kennedy assassination. So they believe Bush. They wouldn't be caught dead believing Bush on anything else. But on this, they believe him, the most important issue of the age. So this is my thesis. Only 9/11 truth can stop Bush, the Iran war, World War III. And if it weren't for the gatekeepers, Bush's 9/11 flank would be in the air. And of course, no gentleman wants to have his flank in the air on such a important issue. And it's all the more shameful because we now know for sure that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the main formative experience of the lives of most of these people, the Gulf of Tonkin of August 1964, the fake incident, we can go into it, was a fraud. And we know that officially since last November. According to World Press, the in-house historian of the National Security Administration, Hanyok Agency, says that they faked all of these reports. Now, my conceptual scheme is a little bit more complex than it has been in past presentations. If you want to understand state-sponsored false flag terrorism, you got to look at patsies, moles, professional killers, or technicians. Remember that the government resources are accessed by way of drills, and that the command center is privatized, I would think. Dick Cheney runs 9/11. An old drunk with 3 heart attacks and 4 pacemakers, his ideologue wife yapping in his ear from the American Enterprise Institute, and he can't hit the broadside of a barn, and he's going to direct all this. Well, no. He has tasks. He is a cog in the machine. He's part of the coup, but he's not directing anything. The thing is being directed from some private military firm. I'll show you some candidates in just a minute. Let's look at some patsies. The classic patsy is, of course, Oswald, who said, quote, "I'm just a patsy." He knew what he was. He is, of course, a double agent, FBI, CIA, or something like that. The problem with the patsy is the question of physical impossibility. The patsy has all kinds of criminal intent. Don't ever say a patsy is innocent. Patsy is not innocent. The patsy is guilty of criminal intent. But what he lacks is the physical, technical capability to produce the effects you see. In other words, Oswald, using that rifle, can't shoot the number of shots in the available time with the necessary accuracy. He can't do it. He could be Satan himself. He can't do it. Sirhan has a pistol with 8 chambers. He can't shoot 12 or 14 shots out of 8 chambers. Can't do it, no matter what criminal intent. Okay? Patsies are expendable. The obvious thing to do with a patsy is to liquidate them, because otherwise they can blackmail you, nothing but trouble, so you liquidate them. Now here are the patsies. We have, of course, the famous Atta. I want to focus your attention on Hani Hanjour, because when Professor Fetzer was showing the plane coming in, that was Hani Hanjour at the controls, and this guy is a documented basket case. They're all low-grade subjects, and we'll see what they are. Fanatics, dupes, double agents. Some of them are schizophrenic. They go back between double agent and dupe or fanatic. A very special case. Here in Hollywood, we remember Rudolph Valentino in the 1920s, and particularly the famous film The Sheik, where the Sheik would hypnotize women with his gaze, right? So this is what he was trained to do. The job of a patsy is to make sure you get noticed everywhere you go, and nobody will ever forget they saw you because you've got that gaze. He's also a sex maniac, a cocaine addict, a drunk, and a cat torturer. One of his hobbies was to pull cats apart, to literally tear them limb from limb. If you want to know the dynamics, again, thanks to Hollywood, we have the package here. This is an attempt to kill Gorbachev in the 80s, and they bring in 2 people. They bring in a professional killer, which is this character over here, right? Bobby Lee Jones, and then the other guy is a dupe. He's a patsy, and they kill him. How about Zarqawi? We just had the great Zarqawi campaign a couple of days ago. And as I say, the thing with him is he's not an individual. He's a stable of doubles. Doppelganger, right? If you look in World War II, it's always doppelganger, doppelganger. So here he is. His secret is that this stable is run by U.S. and British military intelligence. Why? Because he commits atrocities. You can therefore vilify the Iraqis in the eyes of world public opinion, and you can scare the hell out of the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. The property classes don't want to be left to that guy, so they say, maybe we take a chance with the U.S. rather than get our heads cut off. Also notice, what he does is kill Iraqis. He doesn't kill invaders. He kills Iraqis, and he likes to kill Shiites. But wait a minute. Was that the same guy? Well, I don't think it is. It looks to me like it was obviously 2 different people. One guy on the internet put together this photo gallery. This is all the same Zarqawi, we're told, but I think I see 3 separate people, and the first 3 are all separate. So much so that we have this other account which shows where these Zarqawis might be coming from, right? Jay Leno is going to put this on tonight for us. They're actually all 4, they're going to make an appearance tonight. Now also, Bin Laden is also a patsy in many ways. Bin Laden is a dreamer, a misfit, a basket case in his own right. Couldn't find the men's room without a CIA covert operation. Gets dialysis, all kinds of things, legal services from the CIA. The important guy here is Zawahiri, more like a controller, MI6 agent, British agent. And Zawahiri goes back to the assassination of Sadat. Remember Camp David in the late 1970s? This attempted partial peace with all the problems it had led to the assassination of Sadat in 1981. Zawahiri was a key guy, and he took refuge in Britain. The Egyptians tried to extradite him. They couldn't get him out. Now, if you have enough patsies, you can go beyond just patsies or stable of doubles, and you can get a counter gang or a pseudo gang. This is a very important term. I think Barry Zwicker has it in his new book. That's the source. Major Frank Kitson, Gangs and Counter Gangs, sometimes writes about pseudo gangs. What he's telling you here is his counterinsurgency operations in Kenya in the early 1950s, trying to save the empire. That's his other book, Low Intensity Operations. He simply tells you what they do. You want to know what's going on in Iraq? These are the manuals that are used. There's Kitson, imperialist, and that's one of his counter gangs. In other words, there was the Mau Mau, so he said, look, I'll set up my own group, call that the Mau Mau, I'll send them out, they'll kill the real Mau Mau, like Zarqawi, and commit tremendous atrocities, so we British can say, we're fighting for civilization against those savages in Kenya, right? If we got out, then the Mau Mau would take over. Perfect use for these things. Now the moles. These are the government officials who are marching to the tune of the secret government. Richard Clarke is a mole. He's the one who marched into the White House in the morning and started yelling, Al-Qaeda, 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 bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden. He is the darling of the 9/11 Commission and of the television, and it was actually his media contacts that put out the line during the day that it was bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And of course, his demagogic gifts got him a success at these hearings, which is very unfortunate. It shows indeed that the families were gulled, I think, terribly deluded by this guy. We can't forget Mayor Giuliani. Ooh. One of the most hated figures in New York and really the whole East Coast. As a New Yorker, I guess. My uncle was a New York City cop, so I have a certain hatred of him, which maybe goes beyond. What he did, of course, is destroy the crime scene, right? Chop it all up, send it to China, melt it down. And in order to cover that, though, the cynical playing of the policeman against the fireman was a masterpiece of manipulation by this character. He's, of course, an invisible government functionary from way back. How about General Myers? There's no air defense. Who's responsible? He's obviously responsible. No air defense for an hour and 45 minutes. This, I think, is one of the first photos you've ever seen of the infamous Dave Frasca, who got the Minneapolis reports, the Phoenix Memorandum, put them together, sat on them, suppressed them. His superior testified at the Alexandria trial of Moussaoui, said they got 75 emails pointing to this. He made sure this stuff was ignored. Then we have the professional killers. Now, actually, I can't say exactly who's a professional killer in this case, but I can tell you who's a professional killer sort of in general, right? Certainly, Theodore Shackley of the CIA, the key man of the Shackley-Klein's enterprise, right? The target of the Christic Institute lawsuit, if you can remember that one. The Shackley-Klein's enterprise is pretty much identical with Iran-Contra drug running and gun running. Shackley signed on once as a speechwriter for George Bush, the elder in New Hampshire for the primary. I can tell you he wasn't writing speeches, he was doing political sabotage. How about this guy? Andrew Marshall, Yoda, Rumsfeld's futurologist, the guy who was supposed to sit around and imagine what could happen. And of course, if it was a failure of imagination, then he's the one who failed. He should be held accountable. And then we have the private military firms. Now, we don't know exactly what we can pin on each one of them, but when you think of a headquarters, when you think of a lot of these services, it's Booz Allen Hamilton, DynCorp. These are all the groups that have become famous in Iraq, infamous, and they claim they can run any aspect of warfare, including nuclear war, Blackwater. Why not have your headquarters there? Then you have a whole war room, a whole staff, not just one old guy, one old drunk with his pacemaker clicking and his wife yapping. Now, most of this stuff that I'm going to do now has been covered, so I'm just going to tick it off. I had no way of knowing what others would cover or wouldn't. Could the patsies fly the planes? And the answer, I think, is no. Global Hawk could. Again, bin Laden is a very low-grade subject, a dreamer. His main advantage is, he says, all Arab governments are illegitimate, and if you're a real believer, you have to kill unbelievers. So it simply means the Muslims will be isolated. They can't make deals with Russia, China, India, Japan, South Africa, Brazil, anybody. They can't. They're going to be isolated. They're going to be destroyed. Atta we know of, a psychotic, hard to see how he could do these things. On the other hand, there are at least two Attas. There's a growing body of opinion that there's a double in play for him too. As soon as you have doubles, of course, it's an intelligence operation. Now we have Musawi. The story with Musawi is that he was described by his own lawyers as a paranoid schizophrenic with delusions, and I think this is fundamentally accurate. He pled guilty, he put his head into the noose, he avoided death by one vote, an amazing story. And in order to build himself up, he said he was going to take a Boeing 747 and attack the White House. Well, this guy comes from the School for Patsies. This is the Finsbury Mosque in London, which is run by, in effect, British intelligence as a school for patsies. And this is where he was found, and also when he was going to get that 747 and attack the White House, he was going to be accompanied by the ferocious shoe bomber, Richard Reed. Kids are going to have nightmares about this guy. This is, again, the pathos, the cruelty and deception of the world are monstrous and overwhelming. If we didn't laugh, we'd have to cry. This is a mentally retarded derelict who was sleeping on the floor of that mosque, and indeed this one. This is Brixton. Those are the two main patsy mosques in London. So he's a mentally retarded derelict sleeping on the floor, and they get him to go and try to blow himself up. And this is precisely what they do. Then we have the Toronto 17, a couple of days ago. Fertilizer bomb was delivered by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So, of course, if Sergeant Preston of the Yukon, accompanied by his horse Rex, and Yukon King, the Wonder Dog, come to your house and say, congratulations, you have won a 10-year supply of fertilizer, sign here. Don't sign, or you will be arrested. There's also the London case. 250 people come to the guy's house, shoot him, and then they're supposed to find cyanide and sarin, and they don't find anything. And then the Miami Haitians. I mean, I haven't been able to really study this one. The Miami Haitians is clearly a group of deluded individuals. They're supposedly Haitian Christians, and they were obviously approached in a sting operation, an entrapment operation by the FBI, to gin up what? To gin up more propaganda for the official version, which is collapsing, right? The dams are breaking, and they've got to counterattack. So the best bet, I think, in terms of what whatever flew, interesting question in itself, is this Global Hawk, which we know they have, and they can do that, and they can fly any airplane they want by installing that. Why no air defense for an hour and 45 minutes? Well, again, that's clear. That can't be anything but the U.S. command. Remember also that if you're an honest general, you could have one plane or two planes. You know what you'd do with your two planes? You'd put them over Washington, D.C., to avoid the decapitation of the National Command Authority, which was the nightmare that these people grew up with. The controlled demolition has been covered better than I could. Look at the power of this. Look at these huge masses of debris being thrown, in some cases straight up in the air. There's nothing in the official reports that could explain that. Here in Los Angeles, you had a big fire in the late 80s. This building burned, never collapsed. Philadelphia, the early 90s, Meridian Plaza, burned, never collapsed. This is the Madrid Windsor. We saw this with Jimmy Walter on the Euro Tour last spring and summer. That burned lustily for 24 hours, never collapsed. We saw the gutted skeleton. Now, this, of course, is especially acute because the internal columns here, right, these extremely strong central core columns of the World Trade Center, right, these 47, 48 columns, are essentially the superstructure of a battleship. They're essentially a suspension bridge. There's no way that burning kerosene can ever affect these in the least, if only because of the radiator effect, right? It's going to radiate away. What we do see, this is NBC News film of the event, pointed out by Gerhard Wisniewski very early on. What you do see is a series of small explosions. There was, I think, the thermite thesis is obviously extremely persuasive, but might this not also be combined with computer-generated detonations to make sure that the rhythm of this stuff, in other words, you've got 11 seconds for the whole thing to hit the ground, so there's at least some idea that this continuous wave of white puffs it's not the fire, and this also may explain how the entire cement content of the building was pulverized, vaporized into this cloud. And you can see how it goes. It's also interesting that the puffs seem to correspond to 2/3 of the facade, meaning more or less the extent of that system of core columns. So you're blowing up the core columns, maybe after they've been weakened with thermite, because otherwise it would take a lot to blow them up. So this obviously makes no sense, and indeed there has been speculation about nanotechnology and other forms of even more exotic methods. Building 7, of course, is the reductio ad absurdum of the whole thing. Never hit by a plane, but did collapse. A pretty clear example of controlled demolition. Government tries to avoid it. This is the classical sort of Loiseau-style controlled demolition. You identify the main columns and blow them up. And then, thanks to Professor Jones, we've got these things which stress the molten metal, right? Very dramatic molten metal. And I found this one. This impressed me so much when I saw it in Chicago, I had to come and take it. So I hope that's all right. But I think this is tremendously dramatic, right? This looks like the eruption of Vesuvius with molten lava. And how can we explain this? What kind of kerosene can do that? Obviously none. And then we have, in addition to this is seen from above, the destruction of the towers, building 7 over here. Here's building 6 with a huge crater in the roof. Never really explained. That's another one. And down here, interestingly, the pools of molten metal, which are reported to have been there for weeks and in some cases months after these explosions. What force on Earth, except maybe thermite or some other combination, could have produced that? Certainly not kerosene. We've also got the problem of the Pentagon, as you see. The problem is the hole is just too small. The angle of attack of the airplane is impossible. You see it again? Remember, I can only add, that's Hani Hanjour at the controls, right? Who he couldn't rent a Cessna, and nevertheless, he does this. And the Pentalawn, the famous Pentalawn, is untouched. This, of course, is Thierry Meyssan, starting very soon after the event, pointing out how do you get a 38-meter aircraft into a 19-meter hole. Actually, the problem is more acute than that. Here is my version and Meyssan's version of the original hole. And there it is again. And no Boeing can go in that hole. This is after, I take it to be after the facade collapsed as a result of fire some hours or many minutes later. And this they like to show. And here's that telltale piece of wreckage, which seems to be simply planted evidence, right? Like the Los Angeles Police Department experts in planting evidence. They know how to do this. So the idea here is, I think, is also perfectly feasible to have a cruise missile or some combination or some variation on that. And of course, the Shanksville story is we're told that the entire Boeing went into the hole. This is impossible. They say there's a mine here, an abandoned mine. Well, then go into the abandoned mine and bring it out. It's clear that the plane is not there. The plane was indeed shot down, blown up in the air, and the wreckage spread over 8 miles on a very calm day with no wind. So there's no wind to blow it. Now, beyond these standard points, let me indicate what I consider to be far and away the most important single piece of evidence, which is the warning, Angel is next, meaning we're going to blow up Air Force One, we're going to kill Bush. It's a threat to Bush, an ultimatum to Bush, that comes in accompanied by a cascade of top secret code words from all across the main agencies, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, NSC, and so forth, indicating to Bush that a military coup d'etat is in process, a military coup d'etat, if you like, of a new type, according to the Lutwak typologies, which you can find in his book on the coup, that it is a coup designed to seize control of the head of state, and Bush is essentially being told, play along with us, become the spokesman for this coup, or you can be liquidated. And it also includes this important threat, that whoever sent this message has the nuclear launch codes and could start the war of civilizations. And of course, that, from the point of view of the plotters, this might have been a good thing. Would have made the emergency more acute. Now, there's a great debate, psychological analysis, about what is this man thinking. I've suggested that this is actually a very effective commercial for the adult diaper for the depends that he's... General de Gaulle once had the policy of the empty chair. I think here we have the policy of the full pants. Terrified, stunned out of his wits, and called upon, he's looking for the handlers. What do I do? What do I do? Ari is back there saying, don't say anything. And of course, within minutes, the decision will be made. We will capitulate to the coup and give them what they want. What they want is the war of civilizations. That's what we have going on around us. There's a debate about was he told. I think Bush knew. I've seen bumper stickers that say Bush knew. This is an oxymoron. How can Bush know anything? Bush is a moron. I think you would be very, very poorly advised to tell him anything in advance. What you tell him is, Mr. President, big day tomorrow. Make sure you follow orders really quick tomorrow, Mr. President. And this is not just, I'm not just ranting. It is a historical analysis. If we have time, I can take you into it at the end if the clicks go by. About a year ago, this was where a small plane is approaching Washington. The White House is evacuated. The Congress is evacuated amid scenes of panic. And Bush is riding his bike at Greenbelt, Maryland, and he's not told. So the U.S. government went to red alert, and the president is not told. I think that's fairly standard. I don't think, he's not. Is he told before? In this case, something's actually happening, and he's not told. Remember the question about whether to wake up Reagan, yes or no, when something happens? Remember? Relevant. Okay. Now, how do we look at all this? Schools of analysis. Well, there's the official version, right? I take it there are not too many people in here for that. The U.S. government supports it, the neocon academics support it, and the corporate media support it. And there it is. Now, you can have this with unanswered questions. You can have it with incompetence and negligence. You can also have the pseudo-radical version, the blowback. It serves you right because you're an imperialist, right? You bomb them, they bomb you. It's wrong. This is not what happened. It might be correct, but in this case, this is not what it was. That's Ward Churchill and some ultra-lefts. Then we have LIHOP, which I think by now is thoroughly obsolete. Let it happen on purpose. This means that you have to posit the existence of a real terrorist organization out there. There really is Al-Qaeda or something like that. And they really can do what you saw. They can produce the effects observed. Now, my main point is the official version, the unanswered questions, and LIHOP are ultimately all the same thing. Why? Because they all agree on the definition of the world. There is terrorism, and for some reason they were able to get through. So that means the war on terror is legitimate. Now, suppose you find somebody who says, yeah, Bush doesn't wage the war on terror well enough. There's a real enemy out there. I can wage the war on terror better. And that is this charming lady. Her line, as you know, is to say, I would attack Iran quicker than Bush, harder than Bush, and I can get you European troops and money that Bush can't get you. That's her. And if you try to flee from her inside the Democratic Party, you also have another trap set up in the form of this charming fellow who is now out there preaching the Malthusian apocalypse. I want to commend Alex Jones for his speech in Chicago. His attack on Malthusianism is absolutely on target. The ruling elite is Malthusian. They're planning genocide. They're planning to kill 75 to 80% of the world's population, and that includes a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in this city and state and inside the United States. What? All of us. Thank you. I wouldn't. This is, of course, Gore's best friend, his ego ideal. Gore is competing for the high regard of Prince Charles, the prince who says, I talk to the plants. I guess I can understand that. But then they answer me. No, that can't happen. And it's all mouthless. This is an execrated name. He's the chief ideologue of the British Empire, the basis of social Darwinism and genocide, and that's what Gore is trying to bring in. He's trying to create a pseudo-radical Malthusian alternative. So therefore, MIHOP is much better. MIHOP, I think secret government MIHOP or some version of this is basically all the Europeans. I'll show you them in a minute. David Ray Griffin, Morgan Reynolds, Stephen Jones, Alex Jones, David Shaler, myself. I think this is the prevalent understanding. This is Mason's book, came out very soon after the events. That, by the way, is the last hole punched through the last ring. by this shaped charge on the cruise missile or whatever it was. That's von Bülow, the former technology minister, deputy defense minister of Germany. Gerhard Wisniewski. Both of these last two have sold at least 100,000 copies in Germany. These people have a real following. My dear friend Maurizio Blondet writes it as coup d'etat, colpo di Stato in USA, 11th of September. This is extremely sophisticated, how the coup, the modern coup, looks. And this is an example of the modern coup. And here's Annie Machon and David Shaler, both of MI5, both whistleblowers. This is their book. And after that, they went on then to the MyHop. So the goal of this movement, I would say, is we've got to get to the point where we know that if terror occurs, it's not coming from the cave or Hezbollah or Iran. It's coming from Cheney. Cheney is, of course, a kind of a shorthand. I don't mean just the old guy with the pacemakers and all that, the old drunk, but his backers, his controllers, his office, the forces in the administration and in Wall Street that are around him. So these are the people who did it. Now let's see how far we can get. The proof of MyHop, I would say, is in the drills and exercises. Now some of these are actual planes and tanks and guns moving around in the world. Some of them are staff exercise. Some of them are computers, sandboxes, all kinds of different things. And they're run under legal cover. The classic function of a drill is to deceive. If I want to invade a country, I put out a communique saying, my forces are going to have peaceful summer maneuvers along the border of your country. And as soon as they're there, I give the order to attack, and I bootleg the attack under the cover of the drill. The other classic one is two officers. One is loyal, one is treasonous. He's part of the coup. The loyal officer looks over at the treasonous guy's screen, and he says, hey, crashing planes into buildings, what's that? The other guy says, that's amalgam Virgo, and you don't have a clearance. Okay, so it's used as a cover for coup attack or provocation. Now, coup d'etat is one part of the government attacks the other parts. Therefore, there are some people who don't agree with your coup. You've got to bootleg it in so they don't know. Now, 9/11 is a day of drills more dense than any other in the history of the United States, as far as I know. It's 15+ drills that either take place or bear on it. Here's a list. If you want to know about drills, I urge you to go to Arkin and to Paul Thompson, The Terror Timeline. The concept is this. If you want to bootleg a terror action through a drill, design the drill to resemble the terror action you want, and at that point, very small changes will allow the thing to take place, and that can be done by your rogue insiders. How about Mongoose? Officially, an operation to kill Castro. In reality, to kill Kennedy, bootlegged under a cover. This was a US nuclear drill. The Soviets looked at it and said, that's a drill that's going to become real. We go to red alert. So the whole world was then on the brink of nuclear war in the Euro missiles crisis then. London, July 7th, Atlantic Blue, Top-Off 3, triple play, all talked about bombs in the London subway at the time of an international conference. Visor Associates, Peter Power, said we were drilling bombs in those stations at those times. Now, what does it take to realize what's going on here? The actions are being bootlegged or conduited through these actions. So, if you look at 9/11, and I'll do as much of this as I can, you can see that the main aspects of 9/11 are all covered. They're all represented by important drills. We have a series, we can call them the air defense suppression drills with multiple fake targets. The idea here is you're taking aircraft away from New York, Washington, far away, and you're introducing fake blips and fake planes, military or commercial, that are going around saying, I am hijacked. That includes Vigilant Guardian, Vigilant Warrior, it's all in my book, and Northern Vigilance. Now, in this case, they go to northern Alaska and Canada because they're practicing defending against a Russian bomber exercise. Here's Northern Guardian. With this, we get up to 29 aircraft reported hijacked on the day of. So you have fewer airplanes of your own and more that you have to defend against. Now, this one is a real defense against Russia. This is 6 planes sent to Iceland on the day of because the Russians are having this bomber drill. This is supposedly real, not a drill. And then we have the real, illegal U.S. no-fly zone over northern Iraq, which had to be enforced. So planes were sent for that. The result is Langley Air Force Base, the key one, is down to 1/3 of its normal strength as a result of these events. We've also got a couple of ones, Crown Vigilance, Apollo Guardian, about which almost nothing is known. Now we have drills for bases and first responders. September 5th, the whole U.S. Army, as far as I know, goes to full access control, the lockdown of the base, right? What you know from Dr. Strangelove, when General Jack Ripper puts on the security of the base. The firefighters at the Pentagon are prepped at Fort Myer, Virginia. And all these forts, of course, around Washington, Myer and Belvoir, are sensitive because they are the ones you need to dominate to have a coup. Belvoir. The CIA, FBI anti-terror team is AWOL to Monterey, California on the day of. It's like Fletcher Prouty being sent to the South Pole for the Kennedy assassination in the JFK movie. Tripod 2, this is Giuliani's chemical, biological warfare exercise. And we even have the first responders for New York prepared at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, just as it's going on in real time. And the Shanksville first responders are also prepared by a special drill. The main issue here is keep everybody away, right? Don't let anybody near the site, cordon off the site. And now we come to the drills that are actually used to produce the main events. Amalgam Virgo 01, apart from other interesting details, it is either a freighter or a barge, and they shoot a cruise missile from the water, from the Gulf or the Atlantic to the land. This is the Pentagon, as far as I can see. Cruise missile. There's also a plan, this is interesting, Delta pilots, actors posing as passengers, hijacked by FBI agents posing as terrorists. So I would say Amalgam Virgo is the Pentagon. The Pentagon plane crash drills, we've just heard about those. I won't go into those, the models and so forth. It's clear that they were drilling these things 6 ways to Sunday, as Seymour Hersh reports. They're doing NORAD planes into buildings exercises for a long time in advance. Richard Clark had his own drill, crashing a plane into the White House in 1998. There he is again. And even a chemical weapons jet. This was, I think, the subject of a movie. The most interesting, the National Reconnaissance Office, planes hit buildings. The top U.S. intelligence agency was to simulate a plane crash into a building on September 11th. This is Chantilly. This is the agency that does the satellites. So they can see everything. They don't need to worry about radar. They see it all. So this, I take it, if you have an exercise about crashing planes into buildings, then what you're doing is crashing planes into buildings. And I take it that there's an invincible prima facie case that that's what this was. The NRO drill was the Twin Towers. Now, Congressman Weldon has been talking about Able Danger. I just want to tell you one thing about Able Danger. Able Danger are terrorist controllers. They're not good guys who are reporting on the movements of these terrorists. They track them because they run them. They have to supervise them. And he says their task was to manipulate. As soon as you say manipulate, that's what a terrorist controller does. That's what it means to be a terrorist controller. It's also, I think, paired with Able Warrior. Able Warrior is the big yearly drill of counter-terror. In other words, it's a defensive anti-terror drill. If you're going to do a defensive anti-terror drill, you've got to have another one that simulates the attack. So my thesis is Able Danger is the attack against which Able Warrior then defends, right, in the binary pairs. It's going to be hard to find this out because approximately 2.5 terabytes of information, equal to 1/4 of the Library of Congress, have simply been deep-sixed. Now, the last one is the mushroom cloud. You see, I have this on the cover of the book. I don't have buildings. I have the mushroom cloud. In the morning of this day, the U.S. B-1s and B-52s were in the air loaded with H-bombs, as they were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Land-based missiles and submarines were also ready to go. This is before any airplanes are hijacked, and the Russians see this. So the whole thing is mobilized. Also, these doomsday machines, the doomsday night watch looking glass airplanes are all done. This is General Ivashov, my friend. He was commanding the Russian forces on that day. He basically confirms all of this. The air bases involved are these, Offutt and Barksdale. Notice Bush runs to Barksdale and Offutt. And in the Global Guardian, we have a bad insider who has access to key command and control systems, who could actually launch missiles. This is another backdoor for the invisible government to come in. In other words, the pretend rogue insider turns into a real rogue insider and actually launches missiles. Now, why? The centerpiece of the day is the U.S. ultimatum to Russia. It's the Bush-Putin phone call, where Bush says, we're seizing Afghanistan, we're seizing Soviet Central Asia. Now, suppose Putin says, you do it and I'll blow your head off. Right? The Soviets had fought a long war to keep that neutral. So it is essential that all of this be backed up, not just by the threat of seeing these things mobilized, which Putin can see, but also by the ability to actually launch without having Bush involved in any way. So they've built in the ability to launch. Amalgam Warrior is another one going on. That's an air defense exercise. In other words, if the U.S. launches something, maybe the Russians will respond. This is the defense against that. It's all built in, and it all makes this horrendous package. We've also got AWACS planes. General Arnold, on his own initiative, sends an AWACS to Florida and an AWACS to Washington. Looks like a place where they would be, well, for Florida is where Bush is, Washington, the government. And these are command centers of that type. So this is a coup. It's a military coup, if you like, a coup of the rogue network. And the goal is to seize control, in effect, of the head of state. And in the meantime, we're now on a permanent war mobilization with the Khan Plan. We've got global strike implemented all around us. And we're under the Cheney Doctrine. The Cheney Doctrine simply says that the Pentagon has to be ready for the nuclear bombing of Iran soon, under the cover of a fake new 9/11, or perhaps new Gulf of Tonkin. Cheney is not doing rain dances getting ready for this. He's making it happen. A large-scale assault on Iran involving both conventional and tactical nuclear weapons. Bush was asked on April 18th, are you getting ready for a nuclear attack on Iran? All options are on the table. It may be a hopeful sign that his helicopter wouldn't take off 2 days after that. This, of course, would be a tremendous regional conflagration. I don't have time to go into the details. The oil aorta of the world, the Strait of Hormuz, is likely to be interdicted. And now we have just 2 or 3 days ago in the Washington Post, two Clinton administration people, Perry and Ashton, Carter from the Pentagon, saying it's time now to have a preemptive attack on North Korea because they have this missile. Their missile may be a peaceful satellite, but they say bomb it while it's on the launching pad. These are paths to World War III. And the scariest one of all, and the one that I'm going to leave you with, is this one from Foreign Affairs, the Lieber and Press article. And I quote, "It will probably soon be possible for the United States to destroy the long-range nuclear arsenals of Russia or China with a first strike." These are the neocon fascist madmen. That's them. Dr. Strangelove is back. There he is. That's your government. And that's where some of these characters are going to be. This is now the issue, and this is not, I'm not exaggerating in any way, I sincerely believe this. This is the problem we now face. Of course, if you really want to follow this out, of course, if you're going to have a first strike, remember the other guy may have a doomsday machine, as he did in the movie, and it turned out that Russia did have a doomsday machine, meaning that they most likely still do. So the problem now is you may wake up in the midst of the day after the Iraq cakewalk, we're being offered the thermonuclear cakewalk. Now you can stop drills, we've done it, monitor drills, identify drills and shut them down. What I would do is just leap ahead here a bit. Have to jump over, oh, all my wonderful stuff. Hey. I'm sorry, I've been told. Let me just, I've been given a deadline. Maybe I can come back at some later point, but I just want to conclude. I'm so. Huh? I don't know, what should I do? Who's in charge here? All right, look. In Chicago, what came out of the Chicago conference is very specific. There are 6 action points that came out of that conference, and they were approved by acclamation in a gathering not quite so large as this, but quite considerable nevertheless. And I just want to, if you're interested in stopping World War III, this is an action program. People wanted to know what to do. The first is impeach Bush Cheney, but the only hope for doing this is the first article of impeachment, 9/11 crimes, including the misprision of treason. You're a government official, you know something's going to happen, you know it is happening, you don't stop it, that's misprision of treason, and there's a prima facie case for that, right? Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. What did you do? Nothing. Meetings, orders, mobilizations, alerts? No, nothing. Nothing. Misprision of treason. And you take it from there, right? Then it goes up from there. Take back the airwaves. The goal is to bombard Air America, C-SPAN, any and all radio talk shows, right? Al Franken, that other guy, Ed Schultz in the afternoon. That lout. Yeah, that lout. We want to bombard them all. Look, there's easily 1,200 people here. You make one phone call a week of this group. You can think of the effect of this, right? It essentially means that they would all be submerged in a tidal wave, a tsunami of phone calls. This is what we need. There's no point in going out and, handcuffing yourself to the gates of the White House when you can reach 2 or 3 million people directly. Challenge these officials. You'll be seen by billions of people before the day is over. So use the means that we have. Support the 9/11 truth candidates. I'm sure my list is very, very inadequate. I don't even have Craig Hill. But Carol Brule, Bob Bowman, Craig Hill. There's a guy here from Oklahoma I wouldn't want to forget. There are many that I don't know about. I hope one of the things here would be to do it. Stand up. And we also have Morgan Stack of Cork, Ireland, running for the Dáil, the Irish Parliament from Cork South. Monitor, expose, and shut down terror drills. You find out on your website or whatever it is that something's going to happen in your community, you shut it down. You protest. We need deep throats. We need whistleblowers. We need Watergate tapes. They should come forward. If there's somebody in the uniformed forces who doesn't want to go into the Iran meat grinder, now's the time. An independent international truth commission building on the work of the Los Angeles Citizens Grand Jury, which met here in October '04 and in August of last year. And if they call off elections, widen the war, and try to have martial law, the answer is a general strike. Before you talk about picking up the gun, try politics. Try a general strike. There was one in San Francisco in the 1930s. There was one in Minneapolis. There's been one in Spain. After the Madrid bombing, Aznar tried to make himself dictator. He was swept aside by a general strike of 1/3 to 1/2 of the entire Spanish people. If it can be done in Spain or Italy or France, why not here? So start spreading that idea now. And with that, we want to have, of course, since it's Hollywood, we have to think about celebrities. 2, 3, many from the film colony. And I commend my book to you, and I thank you. I'm told we have 15 minutes now. I leave it up to you. You want to see those slides I jumped over? The scenario is Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. This is the plan for the Middle East under Samuel Huntington. Iraq divided into 3 parts, Iran divided into 6 or 7 parts. They're using terrorism. They're using the MEK, Mujahideen-e-Khalq. They're using PKK, Kurdish terrorists. They're using the BP Liberation Front of this part of the country to separate the parts of Iran. Now I want to call this very much to your attention. He has also written, after he finished that, he wrote another one called Who Are We?, which is an attempt to formulate an ethnic or völkische identity for the United States. And it has a lot to do with current events. His thesis is, well, as you see, in the contemporary world, the greatest threat to societal security of nations comes from immigration. I submit this is a lie. The main threat comes from economic breakdown crisis, financial crisis, globalization, the destruction of the standards of living, the union busting, and generally the death agony of the US dollar. So if you believe this, if you go with me on this, you'll be fighting finance oligarchs. If not, you'll be fighting other groups in the population. Just a couple of words now. The history, I say invisible government, what is it? 3 key events. Grover Cleveland capitulates to Morgan, the USS Maine and the Spanish-American War, the McKinley assassination, very quickly. J.P. Morgan, the dominant figure of Wall Street, Jupiter. Who is he? Why is he there? He's the agent of the British. He represents the city of London. A charming fellow. Here he is talking to the press. J.P. Morgan. Who does he work for? King Edward VII of Britain, nobody less. Some people say, oh, Rothschild. Here, this is Rothschild's boss. This is the guy who snaps his fingers and Rothschild jumps. Rothschild wants a seat in the House of Lords, and he's going to get a seat under a palm tree in Palestine, thanks to King Edward VII. And, of course, he's an old roue and degenerate, but he loves the Anglo-Saxon master race. That's his plan. Here's Grover Cleveland, Democrat. He's going to capitulate. And essentially, the way it works is this. The British organize a run on the U.S. gold stocks in 1895 to the point where Grover Cleveland surrenders to J.P. Morgan, issues these Morgan bonds, and Morgan says, okay, in that case, I'll call off the attack on the dollar. I'll call London, telegraph London, and tell them, stop attacking the dollar so the U.S. can go on. Now, some of you may not have seen one of these in quite a while, but that's a $1,000 bill. And that's Grover Cleveland on there. You can see how much they liked him. This is, of course, pre-9/11. Now, William Jennings Bryan in 1896 was so upset about the Cross of Gold. What is he protesting? He's protesting the victory of Morgan. He's protesting that Morgan has shown that the House of Morgan is more powerful than the U.S. government. That's the issue. If the House of Morgan is more powerful than the U.S. government, they take over. And they have taken over. And that has been the rule ever since. And the president has generally been a puppet since Grover Cleveland, actually before. And there's William Jennings Bryan with his famous Cross of Gold. Now then, of course, we have the Maine, 1898, Havana Harbor. And, of course, the Hearst Press, right? What we have today in the media, not new. And here we see them, algunos bin Ladenitos españoles. They're about to blow up our ship with this mine, you see? There they are in their bunker. They're going to blow up the Maine. There's no proof. If you read up here, it says, this picture fixes the responsibility to the satisfaction of the American people. Yeah, that's good, but it's a complete fabrication. McKinley did not want war. McKinley said later on, I didn't want the Philippines. The Philippines caused a tremendous war. So he's forced to do it. And then we get this character, Theodore Roosevelt, the archetypal liberal financier Republican puppet of the House of Morgan. And he's puppet president. One of the main Republican bosses, Hanna, when TR gets the vice presidential nomination, he says, you fools, don't you realize there's only one heartbeat between the presidency and this madman? Madman he was. The British ambassador was his sometime controller and said, you must remember that the president is about 6. Nothing changes. Now, the trick with Roosevelt is this. The two forces that are united in him are the Confederate intelligence, the Confederate Secret Service, and Wall Street merged. His mother comes from the Bullock family of Georgia, and her brother, this is Theodore Roosevelt's uncle, was the head of the Confederate Secret Service in London, and he put up these commerce raiders like the Alabama, the Shenandoah, the Nashville, destroyed the U.S. Merchant Marine. It hasn't recovered ever since. And that's his father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., a patroon. In other words, the old Dutch land grants in the Hudson Valley from the 17th century. So he's the personal union of Wall Street and the unreconstructed Confederate Secret Service. Now, the only problem is McKinley is still president. What can be done? Assassination. Here's McKinley being assassinated by Czolgosz in Buffalo in 1901 to get rid of him so Theodore Roosevelt can become the puppet president. Here's Czolgosz, again, a patsy, mentally disturbed, anarchist, recluse, low-grade subject. That's the controller. That's Emma Goldman, who had Czolgosz in her settlement house and prepped him in the way that somebody must have prepped Richard Reed to do what he did. So the wretched man went out and did it. The last case is Woodrow Wilson. Of course, he institutionalizes the Morgan supremacy through the Federal Reserve. Here's his controller, Colonel Edward House. Edward House, known to his friends as Whore House. He told Woodrow Wilson what to do. And of course, in 1917, Morgan goes to Wilson, it's a younger Morgan now, and says, if we don't intervene, the British and the French will be bankrupt, I will be bankrupt, you will be bankrupt. So we must attack. So this is the declaration. Totally useless, totally gratuitous, no real reason for the U.S. to be in this. So the U.S. doughboys go into World War I and are massacred in significant numbers. And that's my history, my thumbnail sketch of the invisible government. It goes beyond the wedge issues. It doesn't allow us all to be the dupes and pawns of Karl Rove and the other purveyors of wedge issues. We've got conservatives, we've got leftists, progressives, libertarians, communitarians, and of course we have a strong international dimension reaching into most of the countries of Europe, Latin America, Asia, the Arab world, Russia, and so forth. Now, a couple of things on my background. I began studying these questions almost 30 years ago. This was the kidnapping of the former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro by a group calling itself the Red Brigades. I wrote a study on it, published in Rome in 1978, Who Killed Aldo Moro? And the finding, as you see here, is it's not the Red Brigade's banner behind him, but it's the British flag. And this means NATO intelligence. This was a shorthand to show NATO intelligence. Milan, May 1st, 1978. Here are some Christian Democrats and others with a sign saying Kissinger and Gardner, the U.S. ambassador, kidnapped Moro and killed him. So we were denouncing false flag terrorism at that time in 1978. The issue was whether the Communist Party would come into the government. During the first Bush administration, you could already see the beginnings of administrative fascism taking shape on a somewhat narrower scale than we have today. And I followed that then in 1992 with this unauthorized biography from beginning to end. For my purposes here, a very important aspect of this thing is that the hit on Reagan was bootlegged in, conduited, through a drill. The drill scheduled for the next day, presidential succession drill, 9 lives, meaning that those operations were done under the cover of a legally sanctioned operation. This is, of course, the other thing that the book is noted for. Here we have Fritz Thyssen, Nazi financier. He wrote a short autobiography, How He Paid Hitler. No secret there, by Fritz Thyssen. There he is. That's Thyssen back there. You see it over here with Hitler. And it turns out, if you can read the fine print there, that Thyssen had $3 million at the Union Banking Corporation in Wall Street, of which Prescott Bush was a shareholder and a director. And that was the property that was seized by the Alien Property Office under the Trading with the Enemy Act. It was a Nazi bank. So the president's grandfather was the U.S. agent of a Nazi banker. Nice stuff. Right? All kinds of people. They deny it, by the way. They have a thing on their website saying none of that is true. So here you see some of the connections. For people who are interested in this in the presentation, in particular the people doing documentaries, I can give you copies of this if you're interested. Thank you. A couple of highlights from this. Whoop. We noticed that this was very popular in the war room of the Clinton campaign. Here's Stephanopoulos, Carville. Somehow I never got a check. I'm still waiting. And one of the findings, of course, was that the involvement of the Bush family in the attempt to kill President Reagan back in 1981. And if we look here in the lower right-hand corner, Bush's son was to dine with suspect's brother. Bush's son was to dine with suspect's brother. Bush's son means not Marvin that we've just heard about, but Neil. This is Silverado Neil Bush getting in his licks. The suspect's brother is Scott Hinckley, the elder brother of the would-be killer. And there it is. That's the Houston Post, since gone out of existence. It's confirmed the next day. Bush, the elder, says, yes, my son Neil was in close touch with Hinckley's brother. And here's Neil Bush in Colorado confessing the same thing. He was going to have dinner with Hinckley's elder brother the night after the killing. So wouldn't that be time for a special prosecutor? If you had a government of laws, we have no such thing. We live in complete illegality. And as soon as somebody starts focusing on some group or other for being illegal, I have to remind you, this entire system is one continuous creeping coup, one insurrection against law and constitution. This is the book that Bush the elder commissioned to defend his father. That's Prescott right there, Duty on Her Country. It's a tissue of fiction, and the author here, Herskowitz, is mainly famous for writing a biography of Mickey Mantle, the ball player. Here's another version. Here's a limited hangout done by Kevin Phillips. Copied all my stuff and accused me of being lost in snowdrifts of paranoia. You be the judge. Now let's talk about 9/11 more closely. This is my thesis right up front, and I think I was one of the people who knew it the same day. You can know it in about 30 seconds. You can say, you look at that, it's hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars. Who could do it? US, British, French, Russian, Mossad. If in China, then China. If in Japan, Japan. A couple of others like that. But given where it was and when it was, it's clear it's the US. And it's them, meaning a force within the US command. It is false flag, state-sponsored US terrorism. It's synthetic terror in the sense that it's artificial. We'll go into this in just a minute. And it's carried out by this rogue network. It's pretty much the Iran-Contra network in a slightly new form, cutting across the agencies, run through drills. And the goal is, first of all, to secure an oligarchical society, and to do that through the war of civilization. Good afternoon, and I hope everybody has a reasonable level of blood sugar. I'm hoping that everyone has a reasonable level of blood sugar today, because I have a very vigorous presentation. I have to do that partly to refute those reports of my death spread by Randy Rhodes on Air America. So I'm going to be very lively up here. We've got a lot to show. It's going to be an average of about one slide every 15 or 20 seconds for the next 60 minutes. So please bear with me. I also have to say my usual method with the light pointer is now out of business unless I can point in both directions. Hard to do. So this is my book. That's the first edition. I commend it to your kind attention. It's on sale. We're now up to the third edition, as you see here. The third edition covers events up through the conclusion of the Moussaoui trial in Alexandria, Virginia, recently. Now, I want to salute this conference. I want to salute, above all, Alex Jones for being able to bring together one of the only political formations in this country which transcends the idiotic and obsolete left-right distinctions. It goes... Thank you.